That's why when people are happy around me, I'm really excited too. Like, it's like a contagious. Like when I have a friend who becomes, achieves a goal or has a success in any or something, or they fall in love, I'm like, oh my God, this is so exciting. Because it literally rubs off in the same way when people are unhappy as well. It rubs off really quickly.
Exactly. And so there's some science to back that up too. So have you ever heard of mirror neurons?
Like a mirror and then a nuance, is that?
Yes. So mirror neurons is a relatively recent discovery. So I think it was about 20 years ago. And basically what it is that the mirror neurons in your brain are mirroring what the other person is doing or feeling. And so what they've found is that HSPs have more mirror neurons in their brain than non-HSPs, which explains why you said happiness and the contagion. That's exactly what's happening. So our brain is recognizing the happiness in the other person and it's replicating that within us.
Welcome back. We are on today with my guest, Jenn Turnham, on the D.O.E.S for This Shit podcast. I'm your host, Angie Sorensen. And this week, I'd like to start off by introducing you to a new podcast from one of my very own podcasting students from the podcasting workshops I run called Create and Release Your First Podcast Session, where I show them how to do it on a budget and within 6 weeks. It's an intense workshop, and Sarah Williamson is one of those who did it, and her podcast is called Drink Less, Live Better. So her podcast is for you if you're thinking about drinking less. Sarah brings you tips, advice, motivation, and believes that the changes we bring into our lives when we choose to be alcohol-free are worth celebrating. So they're currently around 5-minute episodes each, which is very easy to digest, especially on your way home from work on a Thursday night when all you want to do is pop open that bottle of wine. So Sarah uses her extensive coaching and mentoring experience to help and support others to do the same. If right now you are where Sarah was 6 weeks ago, where you just want to create and release your first very own podcast with ease, and you're just done procrastinating this whole podcasting thing, come and join me and my next group. I won't take more than 12 participants. We start on the 24th of May. It's for you if you have a burning idea for a podcast and you're just ready to get it done, but you just don't know where to get started with all this tech. You're done faffing around. You just want someone to tell you what to do each step of the way. Well, then come and join me. We start on the 24th of May and I will close enrollment on the 21st, regardless if we reach capacity of 12 participants or not, because we need time to schedule our one-on-one call before we start. And you need time to go over some of the prep so that we as a group, we're all up to speed with the basics. So I really, really love doing these podcasting workshops. You'll get tons of support from me and from the group, step by steps, so that you'll be able to release that podcast from scratch in 6 weeks. No more figuring this out months on end like I did, okay, when I first started. Do it in tandem with others, ask questions to a real person, me, no chat bots, and get the added benefits of getting the support from the group. It's a really nice atmosphere. That's why I keep it to 12, keep it intimate and safe. So there is also an option to upgrade to more private sessions if you need more flexibility and you want more custom attention in terms of like in-depth feedback on everything that you do. But that's all on the website, learnpodcasting.online. So that's learnpodcasting.online. Scroll down to select create and release your first podcast in 6 weeks and on a budget. And you'll see it will say starts on the 24th of May. And I've also put the link in the show notes. Now, if you like the show, don't forget to give it a 5-star rating and a review, and be sure to tell your friends. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts. It's free to subscribe. I know when I say subscribe, I realize it sounds like as if there's a charge. There isn't. It's completely free to subscribe. We're also on Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you are listening to right now. Just give it a follow, a thumbs up, whatever it is that your platform lets you do. So the more you do that, it helps new listeners discover this show, which is what I really want. And it also really helps me just put out this free content. So, in today's episode with Jenn Turnham, we begin our two-part episode by diving into the world of highly sensitive people, also known as HSPs, which is not the same as hypersensitivity and histrionic reactions, okay? But you'll find out why shortly. Jenn specializes in HSPs who are extroverts. But for this episode, we decided to keep the difference between introverts, extroverts, and ambiverts till next week, as time-wise, it was just a little bit too much to cover in one episode. But today, you'll understand what a HSP is, and next week, we will layer this with the added components of introversion and extroversion, and why that's important to understand in how we process our lives and what we need to manage it. And yes, you heard it correctly. I did not say ambivert for the last part. And you'll find out why Jenn does not really believe in ambiverts as being a thing. And again, there's many theories out there. Everyone thinks their own way. So I will let you, the listeners, make up your own mind around that from the information you will discover. So just a little note about the sound on this episode. You may notice in a handful of places a little buzzing sound when I speak, and that is because my neighbors decided to have their trees trimmed whilst we were doing this. I removed as much as I could, but it does not really get in the way in the interview, so I've decided to just leave it as it is. It's more like a little buzzing sound every once in a while, and only when I talk. So I don't believe it gets in the way of the interview, so I'm very happy to leave it in. So without further ado, please help me welcome Jenn Turnham. Let's begin. A big welcome. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Jenn.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, absolutely. I'm really excited because you are what we call a highly sensitive extrovert coach. And, so it's quite unusual because I think a lot of us have heard of, people who are more sensitive than others or highly sensitive. And there's a lot of different connotations to it, which we're going to clarify here during the episode. But I'm really excited to have you on because, I think it's a very misunderstood area. And there are things that I definitely relate to with highly sensitive people. And so before we dive in, please introduce yourself, where you live and what you do.
Great. Thanks again for having me. And I'm really excited that you're excited to learn more about highly sensitive extroverts because it is a very misunderstood area. My name's Jenn Turnham and I am, as Angie said, a highly sensitive extroverts coach. So I specialise in coaching highly sensitive extrovert women. I live in Perth, Western Australia, but I'm just about to embark on a trial 6-month trip living on the road with my fiancé in our caravan. So I'll be running my business from all sorts of remote locations around Western Australia to start with. And if the trial goes well, then we may end up doing it for another couple of years. So that's really exciting.
Oh my God, that is so nice. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. That's a whole different episode. But I was that sounds like so much fun. I'm like, oh my God, I've got to get out of my studio flat. This is crazy. Okay. So like you said, you currently live in Perth, and can I just check something with you? Because I know you mentioned that you in our emails, or I can't remember where I saw this, that you have a strong background in applied psychology. Can you explain what that means?
Yes. So basically, I have a Bachelor of Psychology degree, and I'm also a registered BWRT practitioner, which is probably another episode as well.
What's BWRT?
It's brain wiring recursive therapy. So it's being touted as the new CBT, the new cognitive behaviour therapy. So we're getting very, very fast, very, very effective, permanent results with people. So the reason I say strong background in applied psychology is because I don't actually practice as a psychologist. I've decided to focus more on coaching rather than counselling. So that's why I say applied psychology, because I've spent my life helping people use the power of their minds to achieve more in life, overcome challenges, change their experience of life. So that's kind of what I mean by that.
Yeah, it does make sense because a lot of the things is about changing the stories we tell ourselves, right?
Yes.
Because exactly, because we don't want the past to be a reflection of what our future is going to be if we're not happy with the past, if we want to make a change. So I think a lot of the things we unconsciously tell ourselves or subconsciously then gets reflected or projected in our everyday life, and we're like, why are we living this Groundhog Day scenario? And so I think, so that may be something we want to discuss on a different episode, the BWRT, because I really like CBT. So if what you do is like CBT on steroid,
definitely. I'd love to come on and talk about it, because I'm having some amazing results with my clients, and people all around the world are getting some really good results too. So it's a very exciting new area.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing that. And can I just ask you, what got you into the line of work of highly sensitive extrovert people?
Okay, well, I'll tell you the short version of the story, because I know we've got a lot to cover today. So about in 2012, I gave up my successful career. I was the state manager of a leadership training company. So it was about facilitating training programs using psychology as a leader to influence change in your team of people. So I gave up that career because I wanted to chase my dream to be a singer. And it was always my career that got in the way. So I made that dream come true, and I became the singer in a rock band, which was one of the best experiences in my entire life, as I'm sure you can imagine, actually living your dreams. And unfortunately, I was then struck down by what was at the time a mystery illness, and nobody could tell me what was wrong with me. And I've now since been diagnosed with ME, which is more commonly known as chronic fatigue. So I couldn't sing anymore. And so what I needed to do was find a more sustainable business, because I also couldn't or can't work in a job that requires me to turn up at 9 o'clock and go home at 1 p.m. or 5 p.m. or whatever. So I needed a more sustainable business. And then I thought, well, I've got a psychology degree. I'm sure I can help. Originally, I was looking to help other women do kind of what I did, and that is not let their dreams die within them and kind of go out and chase their dreams. But then through the process of starting this coaching business, as I have done my whole life, I'm always interested in growing and developing and improving as a person. And I came across the concept of highly sensitive people. And it's something that I'd never come across. And I think that was because when I did my psychology degree, it was around the time that all the research was currently being done to identify HSP. So it didn't come up in my degree. And so I did a bit of reading about it. And I've always known that I'm an extrovert. That's been quite obvious to me most of my life. But then as soon as I discovered HSPs, it was like the final missing piece of the puzzle in me understanding myself. And so that one discovery changed absolutely everything for me, because I had pretty much a ready-made focus area, and I have such a strong respect and admiration for women growing up as HSPs, and in particular the extroverts, that I just thought, well, this is perfect. I'm just going to focus on that. And it's a very, very specific niche. And when we talk about HSPs in general, I'll give you some statistics. And I did actually have a coach along the way who advised me to change my niche, which was really because she didn't know how to help me in what I was trying to achieve.
Yeah.
But I was adamant, no, I'm not going to do that, because this is who I'm passionate about helping, and I really love working with them. So that's how I ended up focusing just on highly sensitive extrovert women.
So that makes a lot of sense. It's like, some of us, we teach what we had to learn, right? So because we've embodied it as well. So because you've had to understand yourself so much, it makes it a lot easier for you to help others or teach others or, coach in any kind of capacity, correct?
Exactly, yeah.
So we're going to go into, I know you're going to explain, like briefly the difference between extrovert and introvert, because obviously your specialty is highly sensitive extrovert people. So, but before we go into that extrovert bit and understanding what extrovert and introvert, the difference is, and I know there's also ambivert, which as you explained, that'd be a whole other episode. But if you to start off, if you don't mind just explaining to us, what are highly sensitive people? How do you define it?
Highly sensitive people, first to give you some statistics. So they reckon 15 to 20% of the population are born as highly sensitive people. So it's something you're born with. It's not something that you can become. You don't grow out of it either. So that's about 1 in 5 people are HSPs. And the best way to determine if you are a HSP, I actually have a quiz that I put out to help people determine, but the most accurate criteria are, so I've got to give credit to Dr. D.O.E.S Aron, because she's the psychologist who initially discovered and kind of encapsulated what HSPs are.
Is it the same Aron that did the Aron's highly sensitive person scale? Is that the same?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So spelled ARON. Yep. And so she came up with what's called the D.O.E.S criteria, which is D.O.E.S. And so each highly sensitive person meets these 4 criteria. D is for depth of processing. So highly sensitives process everything at a much deeper level than non-HSPs. So we're kind of all often in our heads. Our brains are always going a million miles an hour. There's always a lot going on. And so that can bring about exhaustion quite often. So if anybody out there is thinking, yes, I spend a lot of time in my head, my own thoughts can sometimes tire me out because they're just going round and round. A simple way to, I suppose, explain it is, let's say that you're out in a bar and somebody you like gives you their phone number. Now, if we can rewind the clock back before the days when everybody had a mobile phone, when you actually had to remember somebody's phone number, imagine the process that your brain goes through when you're thinking, oh my gosh, I really like this person. I really have to remember this phone number. So you start repeating it. You start looking for patterns. You go over and over in your head. You use a lot of brain energy to ensure that you don't forget that phone number. That's deep processing. So if you imagine doing that all day, every day, that's what HSPs do.
Or you could just grab a note, like a paper and a pen, right?
Of course you could.
You're not trying to say that HSP don't know to grab a pen and a notepad. They're not trying to memorize everything. But I guess what you're explaining is that it's the equivalent of constantly having something in your mind.
Yes, exactly. So it's that extra processing that you do when you're trying to concentrate on something that is going on all the time in a HSP's brain, and that's the D in the D.O.E.S criteria, which is depth of processing. Yep. So it can be quite tiring.
Yes, yeah.
And frustrating sometimes, because one of the challenges that I help people deal with is the fact that they feel like they're an overthinker. They overanalyze everything and they can't get out of their head. Yeah. And then the O in the D.O.E.S criteria is overstimulation. So HSPs have what you could call like a overactive nervous system. So we're actually taking in, and our brains as well, taking in more information than non-HSPs. So it's easier for a HSP to become overstimulated and overwhelmed. So, for example, big noisy crowds, lots of clutter, a long journey. So anything that just has a lot of information coming at us and a lot of sensory information can cause a bit of overstimulation, and a HSP will then need to kind of take a bit of time out to rest and recharge and recover.
Does it also fall under, when you're quite sensitive sense of smell, like a very, like a really high sense of smell in terms of like personally for me, like my bin has to be changed regularly because I can smell, when I'm in a restaurant, I don't want to sit by the toilet. And I know some people say that, that's a narcissistic trait I've heard before. And I'm like, no, I just like to be comfortable when I eat my food. It has nothing to do with it, It's like, but I can smell things, and I, like we said about the clutter, I like things to be really tidy. I cannot relax when there's when it's very, very messy.
Yes. Yeah.
So I
think what you're tapping into there is probably the sensitive to subtleties, which is the S in the D.O.E.S criteria.
Okay, sorry. So I skipped a point.
But the clutter thing is definitely, that's kind of a lot of information coming into your brain and being a bit overwhelming.
Yeah, clutter and light as well. Bright lights. I don't like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the E is empathy and emotional responsiveness and reactivity. So HSPs have very high levels of empathy, so they're very empathetic. And they also, and that's one of the things that is probably most obvious to other people, in that we can really empathize with what the other person's saying. So a lot of HSPs say that people tend to open up to them really easily because they just get that sense that they totally get them and they can empathize where they're coming from. And then the emotional responsiveness and reactivity is essentially, if you imagine, everybody has highs and lows and happy days and sad days in their life. So if you imagine that kind of drawn on a scale, so it would be like a little bit of a roller coaster going up and down, up and down. That's how most people go through life. HSPs, those peaks and those troughs are much higher and much lower. So our emotional responses are more extreme. I can tell that you're relating to all of this.
I think we definitely have a tendency for depression, I think. The lows, I sometimes I wish I was a bit more like
even keeled.
A bit more like Bambi, a little bit more, when they say ignorance is bliss, it's so true.
Yes.
I think overthinking things, overfeeling things, going deep into things has got a lot of advantages, but it also comes with the flip of the coin, right? Like everything else, everything has a flip of a coin. And I think definitely if I wasn't thinking so much, if my brain wasn't working as well, or I probably wouldn't have the lows that I have, but I also have the highs that I have. So
and I think if you ask most HSPs, because that is, as you say, it's two sides of the one coin. So most HSPs would say, could they get rid of, if you could get rid of your lows, would you get rid of them? Yes, of course we would. But then if you said, but that also means your highs are going to be diminished as well, most HSPs will say to you no, because the sheer wonder at the world and the sheer awe that we experience out in Mother Nature and with beautiful music and beautiful art like that, those extreme highs are what we that's what we love. And so we wouldn't really want to give that up, even if it meant we didn't have to have the lows as well, because there are ways you can learn to manage it better too. So
hopefully we're going to get into that as well. How do we manage those quirks, right? So because I think also in a way those lows, it's interesting that you mentioned it's interesting that it comes under the E, because I think as much as I wish that I didn't have a tendency for lows, or that I know I have to manage my lifestyle so that, I keep myself on, because I'm naturally a very happy person, right? But I have those sides too, which, I've been quite open about it on the podcast. And by the same time, would I have changed that? I don't think so, because once I cracked, if you like, when I cracked open and got into my first low, it helped me to become a lot more empathetic, because on another level than I had been before. And I think that's where the empathy comes in, is because we have those highs and we have those lows.
Yes, we can relate so much to other people's experiences in life.
And that's why when people are happy around me, I'm really excited too. Like, it's like a contagious, like when I have a friend who becomes, achieves a goal or has a success in it or something, or they fall in love, I'm like, oh my God, this is so exciting. Because it literally rubs off in the same way when people are unhappy as well. It rubs off really quickly.
Exactly. And so there's some science to back that up too. So have you ever heard of mirror neurons?
Like a mirror and then a nuance, is that?
Yes. So mirror neurons is a relatively recent discovery. So I think it was about 20 years ago. And basically what it is that the mirror neurons in your brain are mirroring what the other person is doing or feeling. And so what they've found is that HSPs have more mirror neurons in their brain than non-HSPs, which explains why you said happiness and the contagion. That's exactly what's happening. So our brain is recognizing the happiness in the other person and it's replicating that within us.
But this is interesting because, and I know I've interrupted you, I'm so sorry, I know we need to get to D.O.E.S, but I just want to quickly, this is interesting because that's very much an empath thing, which, and obviously HSP have empathy, right? So, but empaths are very well known to, the struggle is to find out, is this my feelings or am I picking up on someone else's feelings, right? And the minute you learn the minute you're aware of it and try to make sure that you discern between how you feel versus picking up what someone else's feel. Because sometimes you can get, all of a sudden you have like a stomach ache and you're feeling really tense and you're like, I don't know why, I was feeling fine. And you have that when I was an assistant to a CEO and I was just like, oh, and I realized, oh, I'm feeling this way every time he's stressed. I'm fine, I'm chill, because I'm not I don't have to go and do that presentation for him. I've done my job. Like I was literally, I'm okay. I didn't really, I was fine. But I was like, oh, I'm picking up on how he's feeling. Yes. And because I got to know him so well, because when you're an assistant to someone, you get to know them. And I was like, I could tell there was tell signs when he was losing it a little bit inside, but trying to keep it cool. He would snap differently and he would. So that's definitely the mirror neurons make sense to me. It makes sense.
And I'll just touch on that empath, because one of the things that I often get asked is what's the difference between a HSP and an empath. And as far as I'm aware, I haven't found any research that's kind of compared them, but just from what I know about empaths, because I'm an empath too, what I know about empaths and HSPs is, this is just my kind of working theory, I suppose, is that empaths are kind of, if you look at the E that we've just talked about, empaths are almost further along the spectrum of empathy, so they have even higher levels of empathy than HSPs, to the point where they feel other people's feelings. And so that's the main difference between HSPs and empaths, is that HSPs can empathize with somebody else's feelings, but they don't actually feel the feelings. Because I've got ladies in my group who are empaths, and then I've got ladies who are HSPs but definitely not empaths, and that's the big difference that they said to me. I cannot feel other people's feelings. So I feel like empath is kind of, further along that spectrum on the E than the HSPs are.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I didn't know about that. Okay.
So then that would also mean then potentially by default, all empaths are HSPs, because that's the only bit that because everything I read about empaths, all the traits that they describe are pretty much the same as HSPs, and the only difference is the empathy is so much more. So empaths are empathic, and this is them feeling other people's feelings, whereas HSPs are empathetic. They can empathize.
But I don't know if this is relevant for the group of women that you coach or not, but that, to me, that just went ding, ding, ding in my mind, because that's why it's also very important that who you dating, who you have a relationship with. That because I've definitely, because I had a relationship with someone who had been divorced for 2 years, but there was so much acrimony between him and his ex-wife, and all I wanted was for them to have a peaceful relationship, not just for their kids, but also for me, because I'm like, I want him to have loving feelings towards her, or at least neutrality, because this anger, or whatever it was, it was affecting me. For very selfish reasons, I want anyone I'm involved with to have a neutral or good sensation towards the ex. I don't want to be caught in. I really felt like I was caught in the middle of the fire, and it drained me. And I almost felt like this anger was coming towards me, but actually, I think I was just picking up on a lot.
Yeah,
makes sense. So that's why you have to really be with people who are. I think that's why inner work is really important for us as an individual, but make sure that whoever you're with, and obviously you attract, there's a reason why I was attracting him, right? So obviously I had work to do on myself, but I think it really sort of puts it into a different perspective that you really need to, if you are an empath or HSP, that you definitely make sure it's important who you mesh your energy with, because that's going to have an impact on you. And that's why, I definitely get affected by people's, I need to learn how to have this glass box, which is something that he used to mention, a glass box, which was, ironic, because I was like, I need a glass box for you. even though he's an absolutely lovely guy, it's not on purpose. It wasn't his fault that I could pick up those things. But So what is the S in the does? The final
so the S
S
is sensitive to subtleties. So this is what you were kind of picking up earlier when you were talking about the smell. So this one can be different for different people. So for some HSPs, smells can be really bothering. for them, bothersome for them, loud noises, but we can also pick up on kind of subtle facial expression changes in other people. So we're actually taking in a lot more information than non-HSPs are. So we can almost sense the tension. We can sense when something's wrong with somebody because their face might just make a very minor change in expression, and we pick up on that. So that's another example of this overwhelming amount of information that's coming into our brain, which tires us out. It can also play out as like extreme heat, extreme cold. We struggle with those. I remember going on a holiday in the Kimberleys in Western Australia, and the air conditioner was broken in our car. It was a stinking hot day. We finally got to our campsite. There's no swimming holes or ocean anywhere because we're out in kind of more towards the middle of Western Australia. And I was just, when I get really hot, I get cranky and I need to cool down. And the only thing I can do is water. So I found this tap that was near the campsite, and I literally sat under it, turned it on, sat under it fully clothed because I just was desperate to cool down because I just couldn't cope with this. I was just so hot. And so that's another way it can play out. And also medication and drugs. HSPs can be super sensitive to those as well. So that's another kind of thing where our nervous system is more active than non-HSPs. So that's the S.
Does that also come under, when you're hungry, you get hangry? Like I definitely get hangry. Like I can't stand being like when my blood sugar level starts to drop, I'm like, don't even come near me. I need food. Just give me anything. Don't speak. I'm like,
definitely. I can relate to that.
Like my patience go out of the window. Yeah.
Yes. And I think that's some of these things. It's interesting because some of these things other people might experience, but they're not HSPs. So that's the interesting thing about HSPs is you need to have all four of the D.O.E.S criteria: depth of processing, overstimulation, empathy and emotional responsiveness and reactivity, and sensitive to subtleties. So you've got to have all four of them. So because I'm just thinking when you said hangry, I'm the same, and I've also got a friend who gets like that too, but she's definitely not HSP.
Yeah, because actually that's actually a biochemical reaction as well, that, part of it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be HSP, but yeah, I'm not surprised that HSP would have that. And so can I just ask you in terms of with the sensitive to subtleties, you mentioned about facial expression. Now, my question to you on that is, I wonder because sometimes, I don't know if there's something that let me know if this is a HSP thing or not. But sometimes you pick up on things and you're like, am I just picking up? Is it just in my head, or am I correct? And the thing is, like, usually, I know that if I don't listen to my inner voice and if I don't pick up on the subtleties, I'll regret later. Like, I know it's usually always right, but sometimes I also wonder, is it just are we just being paranoid about something? Or, because I do like to give the benefit of the doubt, but I also know I need to protect, we all have to protect ourselves. So is this something that you see people struggle with a little bit?
Definitely, yeah. And so many of my ladies, and because that is one of, we don't have time today to go into the strengths of HSPs, but that is on, I do a discovery workshop, which I go into a lot of depth on HSPs, their strengths, their challenges, and all that sort of stuff. And one of our strengths is our intuition.
Yeah.
But the majority of HSPs have grown up ignoring their intuition because, as you said, we like to give people the benefit of the doubt because a lot of HSPs have this it's almost this naive innocence about us where we believe in the best of people.
Yeah, but then I know I'm not naive. I don't know. Yeah. It's this duality inside,
exactly.
But I feel like
we ignore our intuition. We ignore it because we want to give someone the benefit of the doubt, but more often than not, we should have listened. And as you said, if I don't listen, I regret it later. And I think that's one of the things that is really valuable for a HSP to learn, is to trust your intuition. Because I can think of times in my past where we've met a new girl that's kind of started hanging out with us, and she's latched on to one of my best friends. She's living with her, and I'm thinking at the time, there's just something off about her that I couldn't name it. And so when I tried to talk to my best friend about it, of course, I just came off, she just took it as I was just being jealous.
Yeah.
But sure enough, a few years later, the shit hit the fan and the friendship fell apart. I'd already left. This was back in Sydney. I already left Sydney at that point. And this woman, like her true colours came out. She was just, terrible, terrible drama. And I was thinking to myself, I tried. I tried to talk to my friend when my intuition was kind of ringing alarm bells. And that sometimes that's all you can do. But I think when it's related to us, we tend to ignore it and trying to give someone the benefit of the doubt.
But you know what? I think maybe what this could be about is that, because this is how I see it, right? Because I know I pick up on things way sooner. I mean, even my mom has told me this for like forever. Like, she doesn't actually say it often, but sometimes I'll say something, I'm like, no, this person or that situation, and she always says, yeah, you always know way ahead. You know, you've always been really good at picking up on people's character. So it is there, but I think the thing is, because we pick up on things way before actual more tangible signs come up, for me they're tangible. Like there'll be some off, like texts that are a bit off, or things they say that's off, or and sometimes it's just in their presence, right? Like something in their face or things that you can't. But because we know we're so right, but it's hard to explain, right?
Yes, exactly.
So we have there's this dual conflict. So either we don't set that boundary and we have this inner conflict, right? Because we know something's not right and it feels off and it makes us feel a bit sick inside, right? Or we set the boundary, but because it can seem so brutal, right, to other people, or so maybe unnecessary,
lacking evidence,
but necessary, it seems brutal. So either we have that inner conflict inside and don't say anything, or we set that boundary and we can come across very aloof and caring or brutal, and so we have to deal with that external conflict, right? And so I guess like the midway would be to learn how. That's why it's so important to learn to set boundaries for everybody. But I think especially for us, is like learning how to do it in a way that's calm, because we already have this. It feels like this internal knowledge. I'm gonna sound crazy, I know, for a lot of people, but it's like we feel like we have this internal certainty that something is off, and we need to set this boundary. So it's like we need to explain it in a way that we have to set this boundary in a much more neutral way than what we actually already do know. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yep. So it's finding a way to put the boundary in place without kind of putting somebody offside, for example.
Right.
Yeah,
so it's almost like keeping your cards to ourselves. And that sounds crazy, but it's like this is what I've realized, you know, over time, is like I have to be careful also how I'm setting those boundaries, because this is my internal life I need to keep to myself. And, you know, like you don't have to be, there's a way of doing it, I think, right?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Makes sense. And I like how you describe the internal conflict. So you kind of have a choice. You put up with the internal conflict, or you put the boundary in place and potentially have external conflict.
Yeah.
But I would argue that the boundary is always the better option, because
boundaries is necessary.
Boundaries are there to protect you from emotional harm. So that's always going to be the best option.
Exactly. And it protects everyone too. It protects also the other person from harming you, because they may not intend to, right?
Yes.
They may not consciously. So I don't even know if I'm going to keep this bit in there, because I don't know if I'm sounding completely crazy, because I know it sounds crazy. I do realize that.
It's making sense to me, and I think it'll make sense to other HSPs.
We always know. We know. Okay. So so now that we've gone over the signs of what an HSP person is, with the D.O.E.S, and from Aron, I think it was, I don't want people to think that HSP is what we also call sensory processing disorder, right? So, and I know there's maybe not much work out there to explain what sensory processing disorder really is, and if it's real. Some people are, arguing for and against it. But can you, in your expertise, explain to us what's the difference between HSP and sensory processing disorder?
Okay. I'll try to do this in a short version.
Yes.
So essentially the way I see it is, as you say, sensory processing disorder, there's a bit of debate about it. Currently there's no universal definition. It's not in the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that psychologists and psychiatrists use. So it's not currently in there. And the debate, I think, is around whether it's a standalone disorder by itself or whether it's just describing symptoms that are observed that are part of other more well-established disorders, like those on the autism spectrum, for example.
Yeah.
And so the difference I would suggest is like polar opposites. That's how I would kind of describe it in a nutshell, because sensory processing disorder is when people have significant problems in organizing sensations from their body and the environment, and it causes difficulties in one or more of the main areas of life. So it could be productivity, leisure, play, basic activities of daily living. And so I think the difference is it's significant problems, whereas HSPs, there's actually nothing wrong with us or HSPs. Mm-hmm. So it's the difference between a disorder versus a personality trait. So HSP is a personality trait. There's nothing wrong with people who have, and I don't even like saying who have HSP, who are HSP. I always correct other people if they say we have HSP, because we don't. We are HSP.
It's like saying you have HPV or herpes.
Yeah, exactly. It comes across as like, oh, you've got this. That's terrible.
Did you catch your HSP? Did you catch that?
Yeah, did you catch it off?
Yeah.
So I just want to be really clear on this, is that HSPs do not have significant problems. It's a personality trait. There is nothing wrong with them. The only challenges HSPs have is because they are a minority. So any minority group has challenges in society because society doesn't understand them. So that's the same with HSPs. And in fact, I'm actually going to say something that could be quite controversial. I'm going to put it out there.
Go on.
Because I would go so far as to say that HSPs represent a more highly evolved human being. And
Thank you.
Growing... so all the HSPs out there will be going, yes, Jen, thank you. The non-HSPs might not be so happy with me.
Yeah.
But there's actually growing scientific evidence to support my theory. There's differences in the brains of HSPs. And they've also now shown that HSPs have this thing called vantage sensitivity. And what this means is that we respond more favourably to positive environments than non-HSPs do. So from an evolutionary perspective, that is suggesting this more highly evolved, which is what I'm talking about. And as I said, the only challenges we have is because society doesn't understand us. So that's kind of my take on the difference. And I just want to be very clear on that it's a disorder versus a personality trait, and HSP definitely a personality trait.
Yeah, I think maybe even like, with I'm not very familiar with the sensory processing disorder, other than I have like a little bit of an image of it, of what it could be. But I think like maybe like for HSP, let's say if you are in a large environment, it's not like you're suddenly gonna go into a fit and hit your head against the wall, right? Yes, that's almost what I would call maybe the difference is like I would definitely get out of the place, right?
Yes. But we don't have an adverse reaction.
No.
And our reaction is within our control.
It's within our control, yeah. And exactly. And I still choose to go, I used to go clubbing in my, up to my, I mean, now it's maybe like once every 2 years. And now with the pandemic, who knows, maybe every 10 years. But I used to go, but when the music was good, I enjoyed the music and the sound system was great and the club was nice. I'd go and dance all night. So we can still do loud environment, but there's a difference between what we enjoy and what we don't enjoy, right? So
yes, and I think it's also a difference between coping versus not coping. So we can cope, whereas if somebody has a disorder, they can't cope with that stimulation or whatever it is that's getting to them. Whereas we can cope. It might be that we just need to limit the amount of time we're there. It might be that we need to have a little bit more rest when we get home, for example, just to allow our nervous system to kind of recalibrate. So that's, I think that's a good way of looking at it, is we can cope, whereas somebody with a disorder can't necessarily cope, and a lot of it is kind of their reaction is potentially beyond their control.
You know, when you mentioned about the E in the D.O.E.S, like with the empathy and the emotional response and reactivity, with the higher being really high and the lows being lower, is that a little bit of a bipolar thing, or is there still a difference?
It can feel bipolar sometimes. And in fact, I remember my dad saying to me quite a few years ago, before I'd even come across HSP, I remember him saying to me that because my dad's very introverted, so he's very opposite to me. And I remember him saying, I just can't cope with your emotions. They're so big and they're so out there. And because that's the big difference between HSP introverts and extroverts, is the extroverts, our emotions are kind of there for you to see, whereas the introverts would be a little bit more kind of hidden behind a more calm face. So the facade is different. But that's what Dad used to say to me. He said, oh my gosh, like when you're excited, the whole world knows, but then when you're distraught, same thing. He said it's just hard to cope with. And I have had some people say that they do feel a bit bipolar. But there's also the other important distinction I think is good to point out here, and this could also explain a bit of sensory processing disorder too, is there's a concept of hypersensitivity. So not high sensitivity, but hyper, H-Y-P-E-R, hypersensitivity. And I like to distinguish between that in all the workshops that I do, because hypersensitive people, they're people who have delicate feelings, they have histrionic reactions, because they've never been taught or have never learned to manage their emotions. So an example in the workplace could be something like you say or do something and your colleague takes it the wrong way. They have this big hissy fit. They
Oh my God.
Yell a few words at you and then they storm off.
Yeah.
And then later on you go and you try and chat to them and you say, I didn't mean it that way, and you try and kind of smooth things over, but it doesn't work. And then the next day you find out that they've actually reported you to management for your behavior. So that's an example of hypersensitivity. So somebody that's kind of extreme and all over the place.
That's not us. I mean, that's not me.
No, and that's why I always bring it up, because it's one of my bugbears, because in all the big HSP Facebook groups out there's a few big ones that have got like 40,000 or 15,000 people. There's a lot of people in there that I don't think are necessarily HSPs. I think they're hypersensitive, which is a characteristic of a person, not a trait. They've never learned or they've never been taught to manage their emotions, and so they say they're HSP, and it bugs me because it's giving us a bad name, because we're not histrionic. We're not. We can be, and I must stress that we can be if we're perhaps overwhelmed and overstimulated, but a HSP who has learned to manage themselves and overcome some of the challenges that go with being a HSP and a minority in the world, they're not going to have those histrionic reactions.
And also someone who has that kind of reaction, overly reacting, have a hissy fit at work, and then report you to management the next day for your behavior, even though they were the one that were completely acting out. To me, that's also someone without empathy. That person doesn't have empathy, right? Because they
would recognize from your perspective.
They have no depth of processing. They cannot have no self-awareness. They can't see maybe the other person maybe have a point. Maybe they overreacted. And it's also very much a reflection of societies today. Like, people are overreacting. People are it's a very entitled behavior, come across as very entitled, right? So, which we see on social media, we see in a lot of things, a lot of people who, they have the right intention, but their behavior comes across so entitled, and they're so blinded by their beliefs, they cannot have empathy, even though what they stand for originally requires empathy, is actually empathy for another human being. But there's going to be those few hypersensitive people who are going to be ruining it for everyone else because they are, behaving like that.
And giving us a bad name.
Yeah, exactly. I really enjoyed having you on today. And I think, I feel like we've opened a Pandora's box, right? So, which is great. It means this is something that's definitely needed to talk about. And I'm just going to sort of like recap in terms of what you said about, to know whether you're HSP or not HSP. There was the D.O.E.S, which came from Aron. And I was just going to quickly recap is D for depth of processing, O for overstimulation, E for empathy and emotional response and reactivity, and S for sensitive to subtleties.
Yes.
So, Jenn, before you leave, I'm going to ask you the final 2 questions I asked to all my guests. The first one is, actually I've changed that one a little bit, because I used to say, what would you tell your 18-year-old self? But effectively at 18, we wouldn't have listened to us at our age, right? So
yeah.
What would you have wanted your 18-year-old to know?
I would have wanted her to know that she's okay as she is, and she's a very unique, special individual who has big things ahead of her if she can just step into those strengths rather than continue to try to fit in.
Very good. And what stuff do you not put up with anymore?
I think I'm much more choosy with who I give my energy to and who I spend my time with. So I don't put up with energy vampires. Yeah. I don't hang around with super negative people. I don't put up with what we call in Australia the bitches, the whingers and the moaners, which are basically the complainers.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to listen to people, but if I realise that it's the same thing on repeat over and over again, then I figure out ways to kind of perhaps minimise the exposure I have to those people, because I say it's okay to have a vent if you're looking for ways to move through it and move past it. But if you're stuck in it and you just want someone to hear you complain over and over again, then I just don't have any space in my life for that anymore.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think it's like you said, like, it's the intention behind, right? Sometimes, like, you need to, someone needs to process something and just need to almost like brainstorm their issue, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But sometimes you can tell when people are just bitching about the neighbors all the time, or about their sister-in-law because they're jealous of her, basically, but they're just like, they like to say how horrible she is when she's done nothing wrong. There's like this whole intention thing behind, and you go, okay, well, that sounds like you're struggling with something, but okay, have a good day. Like you can't be there for everyone, and some people just need therapy as well. Sometimes I think that's the thing, is to know what your lane is and understand what your friend's lane are too. It's vice versa, right? So it's not using them as your therapist, and also not letting them use you as your therapist, because you're not qualified, like, right? You wouldn't go to your dentist for heart surgery. You wouldn't do that. So it's like a bit like that, right? So, okay. So Jenn, can you please tell us, where can people find you and how can they work with you?
Okay. So the best place to come and find me is in my Facebook group, which is called Highly Sensitive Extroverts Bright Sparks, because there's a lot of free stuff in there. It's where I spend most of my time. You can also find me on my website, jennturnham.com, which is currently undergoing a big overhaul, but there is some information on there, but my Facebook group is the best place to connect with me.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed today, and I can't wait to speak with you again.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
All right, bye, Jenn.
All right, thank you so much.
Bye. And that's our episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to rate, review, share it, subscribe it on iTunes, follow it on Spotify, or whichever platform you listen from. However you show love is how you can support this show. Drop me your questions or suggestions for future episodes via the website at angie-s.com, or come and find me on Instagram at @ToolForThisShitPodcast. See you next week, and until then,
Using health inappropriately.